Let's look now at some polling that's been done, a survey on attitudes towards what policymakers should do on the issue of cost of living. Joining me live in the studio is Research Business Development Manager at JWS, Tom Cameron. Tom, thanks for your time. Talk us through what you've looked at here. I want to start, if we can bring up the numbers for our viewers. The view among voters when it comes to a number of policies, and we'll start with the one that the Coalition suggested, the tax-deductible lunches.
Yeah, like what we did, Kieran, is through our regular True Issues survey, we look at a range of matters, including, of course, cost of living, which is by far and away the biggest that we have. What we looked at in terms of some recent policy announcements from all sides of the political debate, including, as you say, the tax breaks for lunches for small and medium businesses, was one that actually tested quite poorly in the sense that there is a little bit of support for about 33% or so of voters support it, but equally about the same proportion disagree, and therefore it kind of comes up with what you call net support of zero. It just doesn't really move.
And the government efficiency idea of public service jobs, again, a coalition thought?
Yeah, similarly, the APS efficiency drive, which would obviously mean some job losses here in Canberra and other parts of the nation, is again not a policy that really resonates for the opposition. It's got a net positive rating of about +3, which means basically as many of the voters out there really disagree with it as agree with it. It's interesting actually seeing what's going on in Washington at the moment with the President and Elon Musk talking about some similar things, perhaps at a larger scale. But it's just to show that here in Australia, there's not a great appetite for APS job losses or government efficiency drives that results in people losing their jobs.
In these next couple, they're sort of they're linked in a way. The permanent migration policies, and then the bonus for tradies, and both, I guess, linked into the housing question.
Yeah, so the first one you mentioned, Kieran, is a good example of an LNP policy that really is resonating. Like, people are quite up for seeing the migration numbers pause for a while as housing and other population pressures perhaps are dealt with by better public policy.
That's a big number there.
It is. It's really quite. You're seeing a strong support there from the net perspective where you account for the opposed as well as just like outright support. And then similarly, though, when the government looks at doing things for tradies to try to get them into the housing sector to build more homes, again, pretty popular policy that should probably get the attention of a lot of voters heading into the election campaign.
And I want to go through a couple of them here now. The childcare initiative from the government, the income tax, always pretty popular, income tax relief, and more aggressive powers for the competition watchdog on naming and shaming business collusion. But let's start with the early childhood.
Well, the early child one is one that has been announced. I mean, I think even in the House of Representatives this morning, they've been debating the bill about the 3-day guarantee and the the childcare fund. That's probably quite an interesting one to think about. I don't know what you're hearing, Kieran, but there's been a bit of discussion about whether the government are perhaps even looking to do more on childcare and relating to maybe universal childcare or something that's a pretty big reform in the childcare space. We'll see if that's proven to be true. This was a bit of a proxy for that, perhaps, by looking at the policy that they have announced, and it is broadly quite popular, not maybe as popular as a couple of the other things we've touched upon. But it is clearly childcare a big factor in families' cost of living.
Income tax up 70%.
Yeah, I mean, income tax cuts, you might almost say, is a bit of a default. Like, surely with families and households are dealing with cost of living and affordability pressures, they're going to want tax relief.
Could there be more, you reckon, before the election?
There may be. It's certainly a manner to which, I think certainly the opposition have sort of talked about a fairer tax system and a simpler tax system. I think the thing that's quite interesting out of the research that we've done just earlier this month is there's actually some measures, and you mentioned the ACCC, there's actually some measures that are more popular than income tax cuts when it comes to cost of living relief. So if it's about giving the consumer regulator, the consumer watchdog, more powers to go after retailers and supermarkets about price gouging, there's actually some reforms in relation to the environment and water reforms that might be able to deal with food prices. That again shows it's very, very popular. But you can see on screen at the moment, like the idea of giving powers to the ACCC or perhaps trying to reduce food pricing through environmental water reforms has really, really strong support, and even greater support than income tax cuts. So they're just conversation starters. I mean, research is important to say that when you dive or dig deeper into these issues and really unpack what are people's concerns or attraction to them, you can sometimes see these numbers change a bit. But from a starting point, these are pretty interesting policies to animate the debate.
And just one last one before you go, reducing the taxes applied on alcoholic drinks. I would imagine that's popular.
Yeah, look, we actually did the same thing with cigarettes as well, which was even less popular. I think it's just interesting to look at how that's not a popular response to cost of living pressures. simply because, like, obviously people are quite fiscally responsible, or indeed socially responsible, about where the tax relief or the excise kind of relief should be. And that, I mean, you'd have to say that having a beer or having a glass of wine has a bit more social licence today, perhaps, than cigarettes. And even that, you can see the opposition to it is higher than the support. So it's not an area where public policy, necessarily should head. Notwithstanding that cost of living relief is by about 30 points the biggest issue out there at the moment.
But in your series, just finally, if we wrap it up here, this broader issue is the number one issue.
It is.
Number 1, 2 and 3.
Well, it basically is probably even to say right down to sort of, top 6. In our tracking for, well over a decade, we have never seen cost of living dominate the debate or the frustration of the Australian voter the way that it is today, Kieran. It is to say that health and hospitals and housing are clearly the sort of number 2 and 3 issues. But as I mentioned, you're talking about a sort of 30-point gap before you get to those as the subsequent, frustrations or concerns in the minds of voters and what they want to see government to focus on. So it basically means that cost of living is such a pressure at the moment that whether they're responsible policies or perhaps less considered policies, voters will quite often take a very good look at them because they just want to see some relief when it comes to the affordability crisis.
Tom Cameron from JWS, great to speak and have you in the studio today. Thanks.
Thanks, KJ.